The sun was a brutal white-hot coin in the sky, baking the mud of the rice paddy around my ankles. My back ached with a familiar dull throb, a constant companion since I'd been old enough to stand in these fields with Ma and Pa Lin. Sweat trickled down my temple and I wiped it with the back of a muddy hand, leaving a streak of cool earth on my skin. This was my life. Simple, hard, and rooted in the earth. It was in the middle of planting a tender green shoot that I saw them. Two figures, alien and out of place in their crisp city clothes, picking their way along the narrow path bordering the field. A man and a woman. They stopped, their eyes scanning the workers before landing with unsettling precision on me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. I didn't know them, but some primal instinct, a thread of fate pulled taut, screamed that my world was about to shatter. The woman, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion, spoke first. "Lily, is that you?" My name, the one Ma and Pa Lin had given me, sounded foreign on her lips. I just stared, my fingers clutching the rice seedling so tightly I nearly crushed it. "I'm Clara Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And this is Robert Vance. We believe you are our biological daughter." The earth seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The words switched at birth, floated between us, surreal and impossible. They told a story of a chaotic hospital, a harried nurse, and a mistake that had sent me here and their cherished, sickly daughter, Isabella, to a life of privilege in the city. Now they had found me. Now they wanted to take me home. Leaving the Lins was like tearing out a piece of my own soul. Their quiet, weathered faces were etched with a grief they were too stoic to voice. They had given me everything they had: love, food, a moral compass, and they asked for nothing in return. "Go, Lily," Pa Lin had said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your path is different. Don't worry for us." The Vance house was a palace of cold marble and silent rooms. It smelled of antiseptic and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the earthy, living scent of the countryside. Isabella was a wisp of a girl, pale and beautiful like a porcelain doll, with large luminous eyes that seemed to see right through you. She was polite, but a constant, watchful tension hung in the air around her. A week after my arrival, my parents gathered me in the opulent living room. The choice was presented to me like a menu at a fine restaurant. "Lily, you've had a difficult transition," Robert Vance began, his tone that of a benevolency. "We want to secure your future. It's time to consider marriage." Two men stood before me. My stomach churned. One was Julian Hart. He wore a shabby though clean jacket and leaned heavily on a cane, his right leg dragging slightly. His eyes, a soft shade of hazel, met mine with a look of such profound understanding and gentleness that it made my chest ache. He seemed safe. The other was Major Mark Thorne. He stood ramrod straight in his crisp military uniform, his jaw set, his gaze icy and dismissive as it swept over me before settling, with unmistakable intensity, on Isabella. He was everything Julian was not: powerful, imposing, and utterly unattainable. "Julian has a gentle spirit," Clara said, her hand patting my arm. "He may not have much, but his feelings for you are genuine. Mark, however, comes from an excellent family. His future is limitless. He and Isabella are a perfect match, of course, but the decision is yours." The words were a carefully laid trap, coated in false concern. In their eyes I saw the calculation. The broken man for the broken girl. The prize for their real daughter. Isabella, seated on the plush sofa, gave a delicate cough. "Sister, please don't hesitate on my account. I know you favor Julian. I would never stand in your way." Her voice was a soft melody of false magnanimity. I looked at Julian, at his feigned limp, at the sorrow in his eyes that I now recognized wasn't for me, but for the pale girl behind me. I looked at Mark Thorne, whose contempt for me was a physical force. I looked at my parents, whose sympathy was a thin veil for their desperation to secure a spare part for their beloved Isabella. And in that moment something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was the first piece of a shattered soul snapping back into place. A memory, sharp and brutal, flashed behind my eyes. The cold feel of a stainless steel operating table, the fuzzy fade of anesthesia, and a voice, Julian's voice, saying, "She's waking up. Increase the dose. Isabella needs that kidney." The memory was so visceral, so real it stole my breath. It was a premonition. A ghost from a life I hadn't lived yet. Clara's impatient voice cut through the haze. Lily, what are you staring at? Hurry up and choose. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of lies and ambition. I let my gaze slide over Julian's false tenderness, past my father's stern expectation, and past Isabella's performative weakness. I locked eyes with Mark Thorne, the man who was meant to be my sister's prize. My voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, ringing in the tense silence of the room. I choose Mark Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of Clara's breath. Robert's face turned a mottled purple. Julian's gentle mask shattered, his body going rigid with such shock that he forgot to limp, his bad leg straightening perfectly beneath him. Lily, he stammered, what did you just say? I ignored him, my focus entirely on the stunned Major. I said I choose to marry Mark Thorne. The room erupted. You foolish girl. Robert roared, slamming his hand on a mahogany table. Mark is for Isabella. What could you possibly offer him? I met his fury with a calm I didn't feel. Didn't you say the choice was mine? I think Major Thorne has a bright future. He's handsome. Marrying him would secure my life. Isn't that what you want for me? Security. I was throwing their own hypocrisy back at them, my words frank and pragmatic. Mark Thorne's face, which had been startled, now darkened with pure contempt. You must be dreaming, he spat, his voice like ice. I would never marry a woman like you. Isabella burst into tears, a flawless performance of heartbreak. How could you? You know I love him. Julian rushed forward, inserting himself between me and Mark, his face a canvas of hurt. Lily, you're doing this to punish me, I know it. But he doesn't want you. You'll only humiliate yourself. Have you forgotten our promises? Have you forgotten who saved you? His words were a rehearsed script, designed to trigger my insecurities. In another life they might have worked. I looked at him, my head tilted. Julian, I asked softly, does your leg hurt? His face went bone white. He glanced down, realizing he was standing squarely on both feet, and immediately slumped back into his limp, a flicker of panic in his eyes. I was just too upset, he mumbled. I turned back to the room. It seems I've caused a scene. But my decision is made. Without another word, I turned and walked towards the grand staircase, leaving a room full of stunned, furious people in my wake. The game had changed. I had torn up their script. And for the first time since I'd arrived in this gilded cage, I felt a spark of something that felt like power. It was short-lived. As I reached the top of the stairs, my father's voice thundered from below, all pretense of paternal care gone. Stop her. She is not to leave this house. I was a prisoner again. But this time I was a prisoner who knew the layout of her own cage. And I was just beginning to learn how to fight. The door to my bedroom slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the marrow of my bones. The key turned in the lock with a soft, cruel click. I was alone, trapped in a room that was both opulent and utterly barren. Silk curtains, a four-poster bed, a vanity of polished rosewood. It was a doll's house, beautiful and suffocating. I stood there for a long moment, my back pressed against the cold wood of the door, listening to the receding footsteps. The silence that followed was heavier, more menacing than any shouted insult. It was the silence of a plan gone awry, of predators regrouping. My declaration had been a reckless act of defiance, a grenade tossed into the middle of their meticulously laid plans. Now I had to face the fallout. I walked to the window, but my view of the world was already barred. Thick wooden planks had been nailed across the frame from the outside, blocking the moonlight, turning my room into a sealed tomb. They had been prepared for my rebellion. A cold resolve began to crystallize inside me, hardening the initial spark of power. The memory of the operating table of Julian's betrayal, was no longer just a flash. It was an anchor, a terrible truth from a life I had already lived and died in. I had been reborn into this moment, and I would not walk the same path. The next few days bled into a monotonous, grim routine. 3 times a day, a grim-faced security guard would unlock the door, slide a tray of food inside, and lock it again without a word. The only person granted regular access was Julian. He came every afternoon, a picture of wounded devotion. He would sit by my bed, his face a mask of concern, his voice a soft, insidious poison. "Lily, why are you putting yourself through this?" he would ask, his hazel eyes full of manufactured pain. "Your parents only want what's best for you. They're worried." I'm worried. If you just agree to marry me, we can leave this place. I'll take you away from all this pressure. We can have a simple life, the one you've always dreamed of. He painted a future of quiet contentment, a life away from the cold Fiancé. It was a masterful performance. He appealed to the homesick country girl, the one who missed the simplicity of the Lynn's farm. In my first life, his words had been a balm, a promise of salvation. Now they were just lines from a script, and I could see the impatient calculation in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. His gaze would often drift to the door as if waiting for a cue, or his ears would perk up at the sound of Isabella's faint coughing from another part of the house. Just bow your head and admit you were wrong, he coaxed one evening, his hand reaching for mine. I pulled away, my movement swift and sharp. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, my eyes flat and cold. I wanted him to see that the girl he thought he could manipulate was gone. A flicker of irritation crossed his features, so fast I would have missed it had I not been watching for it. The mask was slipping. My silence was wearing him down. He was used to my tears, my pleas, my easy trust. This new, icy stillness unnerved him. The tension in the house was a living thing, growing thicker with each passing day. Isabella's condition, whether real or conveniently timed, seemed to worsen. I could hear the frantic whispers in the hallways, the hushed consultations with doctors. The air was thick with the unspoken deadline. Isabella needed a kidney and I was the key. One night, a violent storm raged outside. The wind howled like a banshee around the house and rain lashed against the boarded-up windows. The chaos was a perfect cover. I could hear the heightened panic in the voices outside my door. Isabella had taken a turn for the worse. The guards who were usually posted at my door were called away, their heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. This was my chance. A desperate, dangerous chance. I waited until I heard Julian's familiar tread approaching. When he entered, his face was tight with a new kind of anxiety. It wasn't for me. "Lily, you need to be reasonable," he started, his tone sharper than usual. "Isabella is very sick. Your stubbornness is making everything worse." I didn't respond. Instead, I let out a choked sob, burying my face in my hands. I let my body tremble, playing the part of the broken girl. "What's the point?" I cried, my voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "What's the point of living like this, locked away like an animal? I'd rather be dead." I saw the shock in his eyes. I used it. I launched myself from the bed, not towards him but towards the wall, making sure to scrape my forehead against the rough wallpaper hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. The sting was real, a sharp focus for my racing mind. "Lily, stop," he shouted, lunging to grab me. In the struggle, I stumbled against the small bedside table, deliberately knocking over the heavy oil lamp. It crashed to the floor, the glass reservoir shattering. Kerosene spread across the wooden floorboards in a dark, glistening pool. A moment later, a stray spark from the wick, or perhaps the hand of fate, caught it. Whoosh! Flames, orange and hungry, leapt into the air, instantly catching the heavy velvet curtains. The dry, sealed room was a tinderbox. "Fire!" I screamed, the terror in my voice now completely genuine. "Fire!" The wind from the storm blasted through the gaps in the boards, feeding the inferno. Thick, black, choking smoke filled the room in seconds. Julian's face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated panic. For the first time, it wasn't an act. He grabbed my arm, trying to drag me toward the door. "We have to get out of here." I fought him, clinging to the heavy bedpost with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "No. Let me burn. Isn't this what you all want? For me to die?" My words, screamed through the smoke, seemed to freeze him for a second. And in that second we both heard it. Clara Vance's voice, shrill with a fear she had never shown for me, piercing through the chaos from downstairs. "Julian. The smoke. Isabella's inhaled too much. Get her out now. For God's sake, if anything happens to her." That was all it took. I saw the decision flash in his eyes. A flicker of ruthlessness, of cold, hard priority. His mission was, and always had been, Isabella. He looked from me, clinging to the burning bed, to the door, to freedom and his true charge. His jaw tightened. "Save Isabella and the Fiancés first," he yelled to the guards who had finally arrived at the door, their figures silhouetted by the hellish glow from the hallway. "She's the priority. As for her..." His eyes met mine one last time, filled with a final, devastating dismissal. "If she wants to die, no one can stop her." And with that he turned and fled into the smoke, leaving me to the flames. The heat was intense, searing my lungs with every gasping breath. But as the smoke swallowed the room, a strange calm descended upon me. This was the moment. This was my escape. Coughing, my eyes streaming, I dropped to the floor where the air was slightly clearer. I didn't head for the door. Instead, I crawled under the bed, my hands scrambling over the smooth floorboards until my fingers found the almost invisible seam. A hidden latch, a secret I had discovered during the long, boring days of my imprisonment. An old, disused service chute led down to a storage shed in the backyard. With the last of my strength, I pried it open and slipped into the cool, damp darkness below, pulling the hatch shut just as the ceiling above me groaned and began to collapse. I was in a narrow, earth-walled tunnel. It was pitch black and smelled of damp soil and decay. But it was freedom. I crawled, my hands and knees scraping against the rough ground, guided only by instinct and the desperate will to live. When I finally pushed open a loose board in the shed wall and tumbled out into the rain-soaked night, the cold air was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I lay on the wet grass, gasping, watching the orange glow of my former prison lighting up the sky. Behind me, Lily Vance was dying in that inferno. The woman who crawled out of that tunnel, covered in soot and resolve, would have a different name, a different destiny. I got to my feet, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. I didn't look back. I turned my face to the storm and ran into the darkness, towards the south, and towards a future I would carve out for myself. I ran. My lungs burned, not from smoke now but from the cold, rain-laced air and the sheer animal terror of being caught. The world was a watercolor of grays and blacks, the storm doing me the mercy of washing away my tracks and muffling the sound of my flight. I didn't follow the roads but cut through fields and woods, my peasant's instinct for land guiding me south. The fine silk nightdress I still wore was soaked and torn, clinging to my skin like a shroud. Each snap of a twig, each distant shout from the Vance estate, sent a fresh jolt of lightning through my veins. For 3 days I moved like a ghost. I used the little money I'd always kept hidden in a small pouch. A habit from my life with the Lynns, a lesson in always being prepared for a rainy day. It was enough for a few stale buns and a ticket on a crowded, reeking bus heading towards the coastal industrial districts. I squeezed into a corner seat, pulling the hood of a cheap, stolen jacket low over my face. The other passengers were migrants and laborers, their faces etched with a weariness I now shared. I was just another nameless soul fleeing one hardship for another. Exhaustion was a physical weight, dragging at my limbs and clouding my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that inferno, not the heat, but the coldness in Julian's eyes as he condemned me. If she wants to die, no one can stop her. The words were a brand on my soul. On the 3rd day, I stumbled into the maze of a sprawling, unfamiliar city. The air was thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and industry. My legs, pushed far beyond their limit, finally gave way. The world tilted, the cacophony of the city fading into a dull roar. My vision tunneled, the bustling street narrowing to a pinprick of light. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was a pair of scuffed military-style boots, stained with machine oil, stopping beside my crumpled form. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the scent of strong soap and metal. I was lying on a firm, narrow bed, a rough wool blanket pulled up to my chin. The room was small and Spartan, whitewashed walls, a single wooden chair, a small table with a chipped enamel wash basin. It was clean, utilitarian, and utterly alien. "You're awake." The voice was a low baritone, devoid of the false gentleness I'd grown accustomed to. It was simply a statement of fact. I turned my head, my body protesting with a chorus of aches. The man from the boots stood in the doorway. He was tall, with the upright posture of a soldier, but he moved with a slight, stiff hitch in his left leg. He wore a simple worker's undershirt and his arms were corded with muscle. His face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity, his eyes a calm, observant gray. He held a steaming bowl of noodles. He placed the bowl on the small table next to the bed. "Eat," he said, then sat in the chair, his movements economical, his gaze steady but not intrusive. My every instinct, honed by betrayal, screamed caution. I pushed myself up, wincing. "Who are you? Where is this?" "Alex Miller," he said. "This is my home. You fainted at my doorstep." He didn't offer platitudes or ask prying questions. His silence was a stark contrast to the constant manipulative chatter of the Vance household. Warily I reached for the bowl. The noodles were simple but the broth was rich and hot. It was the first real warmth I'd felt in days. "Thank you," I murmured, the words feeling strange. He gave a single short nod. In the days that followed, a fragile, silent routine established itself. Alex went to work at a nearby machine shop during the day, returning in the evenings smelling of grease and metal. I stayed in the small apartment, slowly regaining my strength. I cleaned, I mended his few clothes, I cooked simple meals with the provisions he left. Small, practical gestures of gratitude. We spoke little. He was a man of few words and I was a girl with too many secrets. But his presence was not oppressive. It was solid. A rock in the churning sea my life had become. One evening as I was staring out the single window at the neon signs beginning to flicker on, I broke the silence. "I need to find work." Alex looked up from cleaning a complex-looking gear mechanism at the table. "Doing what?" "I can sew. I grew up in the fields but my adoptive mother taught me. I'm good with my hands." He considered this, his gray eyes assessing me not as a victim but as a resource. "The night market. Vendors always need help. I'll take you tomorrow." The night market was a revelation. A chaotic, vibrant ecosystem of commerce. The air was thick with the smells of sizzling street food and the sounds of haggling. I saw the potential immediately. The fashions here were a bold, brash copy of what I'd seen in the Vance's world, but with a unique, energetic twist. Flared jeans, colorful shirts with wide collars, platform shoes. I didn't ask Alex for money. Using the last of my own meager savings, I went to the wholesale market at dawn. My memories of the future, of the styles that would soon dominate, guided my choices. I bought a small batch of vibrant shirts and a few pairs of flared trousers. That evening, under the flickering fluorescent lights of the market, I laid out my wares on a rented mat beside Alex's stall, where he sold expertly reconditioned tools. My first sale was to a young woman, her eyes bright with excitement. Then another. The clothes, fresh from the designed houses of the far-off capital, sold faster than I could have dreamed. The money I made I immediately reinvested, buying more fabric, better patterns. One night, a group of surly-looking men, rivals who saw my success as an invasion of their territory, surrounded my stall. "Out-of-towner," one of them sneered, kicking over a stack of my neatly folded shirts. "Think you can just come here and steal our business? This spot is taken." Before I could even respond, Alex was there. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stepped forward, his quiet presence suddenly filling the space. He looked at the leader, his gray eyes cold. "The spot is rented. The goods are hers," he said, his voice low and final. "Walk away." The man puffed out his chest, but he looked at Alex's shoulders, at the calm, dangerous certainty in his eyes, and he faltered. He muttered a curse, but he and his companions slunk away into the crowd. Alex turned back to his tools as if nothing had happened. My heart was pounding, but not with fear. With a fierce, protective warmth. He had stood up for me without being asked, without demanding anything in return. Weeks turned into a month. My small stall flourished. I saved every spare coin, and with my growing confidence I made my first big move. I rented a tiny, damp storeroom, bought a second-hand sewing machine, and hired 2 seamstresses from the neighborhood. I was no longer just reselling, I was creating. I designed my own shirts, blending the bold colors of the market with more elegant, tailored cuts. My brand, born from ashes, was taking its first breath. One evening I was going over my ledger, my fingers stained with ink, a small smile on my face. Alex set a steaming cup of tea beside me. "You're impressive," he said, his voice quiet in the small room. "Smarter than most people I've met." The simple praise struck me with a force that Julian's elaborate lies never could. It was honest. Earned. My throat tightened. Across 2 lifetimes, no one had ever looked at my ambition and seen something worthy of respect. In that moment, surrounded by the humble evidence of my own labor, with this quiet, steady man beside me, I felt a flicker of something I thought had died in that fire. Hope. The girl who was Lily Vance was truly gone. The woman I was becoming had a name I had chosen for myself. Lily. And for the first time my future felt like my own. But the past is a ghost that refuses to be buried. And it was waiting for me just around the corner. The rhythm of my new life was a satisfying melody of hard work and quiet triumphs. My little workshop hummed with the sound of sewing machines. The Lily line, as I'd boldly started calling my designs, was gaining a reputation. The clothes were fresh, modern, and most importantly, affordable for the young factory workers and secretaries who were the lifeblood of the city. I had traded the gilded cage for a cramped apartment above my workshop, and the silence of oppression for the satisfying noise of industry. Alex was a constant, steady presence. He never spoke of his past and I never asked. His limp, I learned, was from a piece of shrapnel that had ended his military career. He never complained. He was a man who fixed things. Machines, my broken lock, the occasional bully at the market. He was becoming the foundation upon which I was rebuilding my world. One afternoon I was at the bustling wholesale market finalizing a large fabric order. The air was thick with the smell of dye and the shouts of merchants. I turned to one of my assistants, a young man named Leo. "Take these samples to the workshop. Tell May to start on the red poplin first." Just as Leo nodded, a voice cut through the din, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. "Lily." It was a strangled cry, full of disbelief and a desperate, aching hope. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. The ghost had found me. Slowly against my will I turned, and there he was. Julian Hart. He stood 10 paces away, his face a ghastly white, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He looked thinner, haunted, his expensive clothes rumpled and dusty. He was a shattered mirror of the man I had known. "By God, Lily, it's really you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're alive." For a moment the world narrowed to his face. I saw the genuine shock, the tears welling in his eyes. And for a single treacherous second, a phantom pain, the memory of a love I once thought was real, lanced through my heart. Then it was gone, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. My eyes, which had once looked at him with adoration, were now twin chips of flint. Without a word, I turned on my heel and began to walk away, my pace quick and purposeful. "Lily. Wait." He lunged forward, his hand closing around my upper arm with a frantic strength. The touch was a brand, a violation. I recoiled, trying to yank my arm free, but his grip was like iron. Before I could shout, a large, grease-stained hand clamped down on Julian's wrist. "Let go." Alex's voice was low, but it carried a vibration of pure threat that silenced the market noise around us. He had materialized at my side, his tall frame a solid wall between me and my past. Dressed in his simple work clothes, he nonetheless radiated an authority that made Julian flinch. Julian, startled, released my arm. He stared at Alex, his confusion turning to outrage. "Who the hell are you?" he spat. "What right do you have to interfere?" Alex's face was an impassive mask. His grip on Julian's wrist didn't loosen. "She's with me," he said, his voice cold and final. "You don't have the right to touch her." The words, "she's with me," echoed in the space between us. They were a claim of protection. My heart hammered, not with fear but with a fierce, sudden gratitude. I found my voice sharp and icy. "Mr. Hart. Show some respect." The crowd of vendors and shoppers had stopped to watch, their murmurs creating a buzzing soundtrack to the scene. Julian's face crumpled. He looked from Alex's unyielding stance to my cold disdain, and something in him broke. "Lily," he pleaded, his voice raw and broken. "How can you look at me like that? You love me. You know you do." My steps faltered. The words, once my entire world, now felt like a pathetic, dusty relic. The pain in my chest was no longer for a lost love, but for the naive girl who had believed in it. I took a deep, shuddering breath and kept walking, leaving him standing there, a portrait of desperate ruin. But Julian was unmoored. My survival was his undoing. The next day he was there outside my workshop gate. The day after he lingered by my stall in the night market. His presence was a constant, shadowy reminder. "Lily, please just talk to me," he would beg, his eyes bloodshot. "Let me explain." I never looked at him. I never responded. What was there to explain? That he had chosen to let me burn? The charred ruins of that room were explanation enough. One afternoon as I was closing the stall, he rushed forward again, grabbing my wrist. His grip was feverish. "Lily, I was wrong," he cried, his eyes wild. "You can hit me, curse me, do whatever you want, but don't ignore me like this. I love you. I regret everything, it's killing me. I can't live without you." I wrenched my hand free, my voice a low, cold whisper. Between you and me there is nothing left. His face went ashen. How can you say that? Because it was never real, I said, my words precise and sharp as scalpels. You pretended to be crippled. You pretended to love me. All of it was a lie to win my pity, to control me, to get close to your precious Isabella. You wanted my life. Why should I forgive you? I threw the truth in his face, the truth I had learned in my first death. The truth about his feigned disability, his chaste marriage, all to keep himself pure for the sickly girl he truly loved. He stared at me, his mouth agape, the last of his defenses shattered. He had no script for this. Don't push me, Lily, he whispered, his voice cracking with a dangerous edge. The next day he returned, but he couldn't get close. A military jeep, stark and authoritative, was parked in front of my factory. Several soldiers, their postures ramrod straight, were speaking with Alex, their salutes crisp and respectful. Commander Miller, one of them said. I froze, my blood running cold. Commander? Alex merely nodded. Routine inspection, he said casually, his eyes meeting mine over their heads. Thought I'd stop by. Julian stood rooted to the spot across the street, his face a mask of dawning horror and utter defeat. He had thought Alex was just a crippled, discharged soldier. Now he saw the truth. The man standing by my side was someone whose power and status far eclipsed his own, far eclipsed even the Fiancés. I looked at Alex, this man of quiet strength and hidden rank, who had never felt the need to flaunt his power. A profound, warm certainty settled in my chest. He was my sanctuary. Julian, however, was now a man with nothing left to lose. And a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. The revelation of Alex's rank acted not as a deterrent, but as a final, maddening provocation for Julian. His pursuit twisted, becoming a public spectacle of self-destruction. He was a ghost haunting my new life, and he was determined to drag me back into his grave. By day he would stand outside the factory gates, a bottle of cheap liquor in his hand, his expensive clothes growing increasingly shabby. The sharp, acrid smell of alcohol clung to him like a shroud. By night he would crouch in the shadows outside my apartment building, his voice a ragged, broken thing carried on the wind. Lily, he'd wail, using the name he'd overheard my workers call me. It sounded like a curse on his lips. Come out. See me. I know you still love me. I know it. From my window I would look down at his crumpled form, my heart not softening with pity, but hardening with a cold, detached disgust. He was no longer the cunning manipulator. He was a rabid dog, and I felt nothing. One evening as I returned from the workshop, he emerged from the alley beside my building. He didn't speak. He just dropped to his knees on the hard concrete, the impact a sickening crack that made me flinch. I saw the dark bloom of blood immediately seep through the fabric of his trousers. Lily, I was wrong, he begged, his voice a raw sob. You can hit me, curse me, but don't treat me so coldly. Before I could react, before I could even process the shocking display, he raised a fist and slammed it into his own face. The crunch of cartilage was audible. Blood poured from his nose, splattering onto the ground. A jolt, purely physical, shot through me. It was the shock of witnessing such violent public degradation. But any trace of sympathy was instantly incinerated by the memory of flames. As I stood frozen, Alex was suddenly there. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace, placing his body between Julian and me. He didn't look at the bleeding, kneeling man. His focus was entirely on me. He took my hand, his grip firm and warm, grounding me in the present. Don't be afraid, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm here. The sight of our joined hands was the final trigger for Julian's shattered sanity. His bloodied face snapped up, his eyes blazing with a feral red-rimmed jealousy. Who the hell are you? He shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. She's mine. She's always been mine. Alex's gaze, when it finally turned to Julian, was so icy it could have frozen hell. The air itself seemed to grow cold. From this day forward, Alex said, each word a hammer blow, if you take one more step toward her, if you so much as whisper her name, I will make sure you disappear. Permanently. It was not a shouted threat. It was a promise, delivered with the calm, absolute authority of a man who had the power to see it through. For the first time I saw genuine, primal fear in Julian's eyes. He shrunk back, the fight draining out of him, replaced by the terrified understanding that he had finally encountered a force he could not bully or manipulate. He scrambled backwards, then turned and fled into the darkness, a broken, bleeding creature. But he wasn't finished. A cornered animal always has one last desperate trick. A few days later he returned. And he wasn't alone. He had brought Isabella. She was a horrifying parody of the delicate girl I remembered. Emaciated, her skin stretched taut over fragile bones, she looked like a skeleton draped in fine silk. She leaned heavily on Julian's arm, her breath a faint, wheezing rattle. The sickness that had been my intended death sentence was now clearly claiming its intended victim. "Sister," she whispered, the word a faint exhalation. The sound was a needle of ice in my heart. It wasn't love I felt, but a complicated, bitter sorrow. We were both pawns in this game, though she had been the cherished one. Julian's face was a grim mask of triumph and accusation. "See, Lily," he said, his voice hoarse. "Look at her. She's dying. Can't you stop being angry now? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, using Isabella's failing body as a bargaining chip to assuage his own guilt, unleashed a cold fury within me. I clenched my jaw so tightly I thought my teeth would crack. "Julian Hart," I said, my voice dangerously even. "There is nothing left between you and me. You're pathetic." The word hung in the air, stark and brutal. His face contorted. Tears, real this time of sheer frustration and pain, streamed down his cheeks, mingling with the dried blood. He let out a laugh that was a sob. "Pathetic? If being pathetic is what it takes to make you come back, I'll be the most pathetic man alive." Before I could move, before I could even draw breath to respond, Alex was there. He didn't engage with their drama. He simply stepped to my side, his arms sliding around my waist, pulling me firmly against him into the solid, unshakable fortress of his presence. "Let's go home," he said quietly, his words meant only for me. That single, protective gesture was the final blow. Julian completely shattered. He shoved Isabella aside and she crumpled to the ground with a weak cry. He didn't seem to notice. He began to wail, a high, keening sound of utter despair, beating his fists against his own head. "Lily, how can you do this? How can you abandon me? After everything?" I didn't look back. Guided by Alex's steady arm, I walked away from the wreckage of my past, leaving the two of them, the manipulator and his dying muse, in the dust of the street. Later, I heard through the city's gossip mill that Isabella's condition had deteriorated rapidly. She was sent back to the Vance estate in the countryside, a final, futile attempt to save her. Julian, truly unhinged, was often seen wandering the streets, his hair wild, his clothes in tatters, muttering my name over and over like a broken prayer. I stood in my thriving workshop, surrounded by the vibrant colors of my own creation, the hum of the sewing machines a symphony of my independence. The ghost was still there, but its power over me was fading, replaced by the bright, tangible reality of the life I was building. The past was a corpse and I refused to live in its tomb. In the wake of Julian's final, pathetic collapse, a profound silence settled over my life, the peaceful kind. The ghost had been exorcised, not by a grand confrontation, but by the steady, unwavering reality of my new existence. The constant anxious knot in my stomach, a companion since my arrival at the Vance estate, began to slowly loosen its grip. My business, Lily's line, was no longer just a stall. It was a proper small-scale factory. I rented a larger, sunlit space on a better street. I hired more seamstresses, women whose skilled hands and sharp eyes were the engine of my success. I sourced quality fabric, I managed the books late into the night, my fingers stained with ink and my mind buzzing with plans for expansion. The money I earned was mine, hard-won and sweeter than any allowance the Vances could have ever given me. Alex was the quiet cornerstone of it all. He never tried to manage my business or tell me what to do. His support was more subtle, more powerful. He fixed the temperamental electrical wiring in the new workshop. He built sturdy, beautiful display racks for the shopfront I was planning. When a supplier tried to cheat me with substandard material, it was Alex who accompanied me to the meeting, his silent, imposing presence ensuring I got a full refund and an apology without a single raised voice. Our relationship was a slow, quiet river, deepening day by day. We didn't speak of love. There were no grand declarations. It was in the cup of tea he left on my ledger when I worked too late. It was in the way he'd listen, really listen when I talked about my designs, his gray eyes focused and thoughtful. It was in the simple, solid comfort of sharing a meal after a long day, the silence between us companionable, not empty. One evening we were walking back from the market, the neon signs painting the wet streets in streaks of color. My hand brushed against his and his fingers laced through mine, calloused and strong. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a promise. It was just a fact. We fit. "I'm not who you think I am," I said softly, the words escaping me before I could stop them. It was the closest I had ever come to telling him my truth. He didn't look at me, just kept his gaze on the road ahead, his hand tightening slightly around mine. "I know who you are," he replied. "You're Lily. The woman who built an empire from a market stall. The smartest person I've ever met." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. He saw me. Not the lost Vance daughter, not the victim, not the pawn. He saw the person I had fought to become. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed, and with them the fashions I created. My designs began to be featured in a local magazine. I started getting orders from boutiques in neighboring cities. The girl from the rice paddies was becoming a name in the regional fashion scene. It was during this time of blooming success that I received a terse, formal letter. It was from Robert Vance. Isabella's condition was critical. The doctors held no hope. He was asking for me. I sat at my desk, the crisp paper feeling vile in my hands. Did I owe her anything? This sister who had been the sun around which my destruction orbited? The memory of her frail, wasted body on the street surfaced, and I felt a pang that was not love, but a deep human pity. She too had been a prisoner, coddled and cherished into helplessness. "I have to go," I told Alex that night. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just nodded. "I'll come with you." We took the train, the landscape transforming from the gritty industrial coast to the lush, green countryside I remembered. The Vance estate looked smaller, shabbier, as if the life was being sucked out of it along with Isabella's. Clara Vance opened the door. She had aged a decade. Her eyes, when they fell on me, held a complex storm of resentment, grief, and a shocking, grudging respect. She said nothing to me, her gaze shifting to Alex, taking in his quiet authority, before she wordlessly led us to Isabella's room. The room was dark, smelling of medicine and decay. Isabella lay in the large bed, a tiny skeletal figure. Her eyes, too large for her face, fluttered open as I approached. "You came," she rasped, a ghost of a smile on her bloodless lips. "I knew you would." I stood by her bed, Alex a silent sentinel near the door. "Why?" asked my voice soft. "Why did you want to see me?" Her gaze was unervingly clear. "To see the winner," she whispered. "It was always a competition, though you never knew it. For our parents' love. For Julian's devotion. For a future." A fit of coughing racked her body. When it subsided, she looked at me with a startling lucidity, all pretense gone. "Why is it you who gets to live? Why did God let you live when I was the one who was loved?" There was no malice in the question. It was a genuine, bewildered inquiry from a life that had been given everything except a will of its own. I looked at her, this dying girl who had been my enemy and my reflection, and I felt a profound, aching sadness. "Because Isabella," I said, my voice steady, "my life was never given to me. I had to take it. And that is the only victory that matters." She stared at me for a long moment, and then, incredibly, she gave a weak, slow nod, as if some great mystery had finally been solved. She closed her eyes, exhausted. We left soon after. I never saw her again. A week later, a brief, formal note arrived announcing her passing. There was no invitation to the funeral. I was not family. Not anymore. I stood in my workshop, the note crumpled in my hand. I felt no triumph. Only a quiet, final closing of a long, painful chapter. The last thread tying me to the Vances had been severed. That night I told Alex everything. The whole sordid story. The switch, the manipulation, the fake suitor, the planned organ harvest, the fire, my escape. I told him about the memories that felt like a previous life. I spoke until my voice was hoarse, purging the poison of my past into the quiet, accepting space between us. When I finished, he didn't recoil in horror. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply reached out and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly against his chest. Your past is a country you left, he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. You are the citizen of your future now. And I am proud to stand in it with you. In his arms, with the weight of my truth finally shared, I felt the last of the ghost's chains fall away. The foundation of my new life was no longer built on the ashes of the old, but on the solid, enduring stone of the present. And it was unshakable. The years began to fold into one another, a tapestry woven with the threads of hard work, quiet love, and growing success. Isabella's death was a final, distant echo from a world that no longer had any claim on me. The Fiancés, I heard through vague rumors, had retreated into obscurity, their wealth and influence seemingly drained along with their adopted daughter's life. My brand, Lily's, grew from a local favorite to a recognized name. I opened a flagship boutique in the city's best shopping district. The small, damp storeroom was a memory, replaced by a bright, modern studio where a team of talented designers now worked under my direction. I was no longer just a seamstress. I was a businesswoman, an employer, a creator. Alex and I married in a simple civil ceremony. There was no family from my side, only my beaming, proud employees and a few of his quiet, respectable friends from his military days. We bought a small house with a garden, a far cry from the Vance mansion, but every brick of it felt like ours. It was a home built on truth and mutual respect, a fortress of peace. We had 2 children. A girl with my dark, determined eyes and a boy with Alex's calm, gray gaze. They were the ultimate affirmation of my new life. Loved not for what they could provide but simply for who they were. I would often watch them playing in the garden, their laughter a sound that healed the last hidden fractures in my soul. The ghost of the girl I might have been, the sacrificed, the used, the forgotten, finally ceased her whispering. But the past, it seems, always keeps one last bitter card to play. The news came not with a shout, but as a piece of city gossip, passed along by one of my seamstresses. That poor man, Hart, you remember him, the one who used to cause scenes? They found him in a flophouse down by the docks. He'd taken his own life. I was in the middle of a fitting for an important client. The pincushion in my hand didn't even tremble. I simply nodded, murmured a non-committal sound and continued my work, pinning the hem of a beautiful silk dress. The client chattered on, oblivious. Later, after the shop was closed and the children were asleep, I stood in the quiet of my living room. Alex came to stand beside me, draping a shawl over my shoulders. Lily, he said softly, using the name only he knew, the name that connected my past to my present. I heard. I leaned back against his solid chest, drawing strength from his warmth. It doesn't hurt, I said, and I was surprised to find it was the truth. It just feels empty. Like hearing about the death of a character in a book you read long ago. And it was true. The Julian Hart who had died in that grimy room was not the man I had once thought I loved. That man had never existed. He was a phantom, a construct of lies. The real Julian had died for me the moment he chose to leave me in that fire. This was just the final, sordid epilogue to his story. The following day, I had a major contract signing with an international distributor. It was the culmination of years of work, the gateway to taking Lily's to a global market. I dressed in one of my own power suits, a sharp, modern design in deep cobalt blue. My hand was steady as I signed the thick document, my signature, Lily Miller, flowing across the page with a confident flourish. The name was my armor, my banner, my truth. After the ceremony, amidst the congratulations and the clinking of glasses, Alex found me. He took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "I'm here to take you home," he said, his voice the same steady anchor it had always been. I looked up at him. The sunset streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel ballroom, laying a path of liquid gold at our feet and setting his shoulders aglow. He had been my protector, my partner, my sanctuary. He had never tried to erase my past, but had helped me build a future so bright that the shadows could no longer touch me. We walked out of the glittering room, away from the noise and the accolades, and into the quiet, ordinary evening. The terrible memories had long since been buried by the rich, fertile soil of a life well lived. I had my adoptive parents, the Lynns, visiting often, their love a constant grounding force. I had a husband who was my equal in every way. I had a thriving career born from my own mind and hands. I had 2 healthy, happy children. Julian Hart's suicide was a footnote, a sad, final whisper from a history that had lost all its power to harm me. The past could blow away with the wind. It was gone. The future was mine, bright, full of hope, and stretching out before me like the endless, sun-kissed horizon. 15 years. The phrase itself feels monumental. A lifetime within a lifetime. The city around us had transformed, its skyline reaching for the clouds, and in many ways Lily's had grown right along with it. We were no longer just a brand. We were an institution, a testament to a particular kind of resilient feminine ambition. I was in my office, a spacious, light-filled room overlooking the bustling street below, reviewing the prototype for our new winter collection. The designs were elegant, sophisticated, a world away from the vibrant market shirts I had started with. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Anya, buzzed the intercom. "Ms. Miller, your 3 o'clock is here." A Miss Clara Vance. The name landed not like a bomb but like a small, cold stone dropped into a still pond. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. I felt a faint, old tension in my shoulders, but it was fleeting, the ghost of a forgotten reflex. "Send her in," I said, my voice calm. The woman who entered was a stranger. The crisp city elegance was gone, replaced by the worn, tired look of someone life has passed by. Her clothes were dated, her posture defeated. The Clara Vance I had known was a creature of calculated poise. This woman was simply old. "Lily," she began, her voice thin. "It's Lily," I corrected her gently without malice. She flinched, then nodded, her eyes taking in the room. The sleek furniture, the framed magazine covers, the evidence of a success she could no longer comprehend. "Lily," she amended. "You've done well for yourself." "I have," I agreed. There was no point in false modesty. She twisted her hands, a nervous, fragile gesture. "Robert passed away last year. A stroke." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and the words were polite, hollow. "I felt nothing." "It was quick," she said almost to herself. Then her eyes, still sharp with a lingering sense of entitlement, met mine. "The business, his affairs, they're a mess. There are debts. But there was not a reconciliation. A shakedown." "I see," I said, my tone neutral. She leaned forward, a hint of the old manipulation in her eyes. "We are still your family, Lily. Blood is blood. A daughter has a responsibility. You have more than enough. Surely you could." I raised a hand, stopping her. The gesture was not aggressive, but it was final. "Clara," I said, using her first name, establishing the distance between us. "You are not my family. My family is the man waiting for me at home and the 2 children doing their homework at the kitchen table. My family is the couple who taught me to plant rice and to love honestly. You gave me life, but you also gave me a death sentence. We are even. There is no debt." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, the last of her hope extinguished. There were no more threats she could make, no more levers she could pull. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the asset to be managed, but the benefactor she dared to petition. "Now," I said, standing up, signaling the end of our audience. "If that is all, I have a business to run. I wish you well." She stood on trembling legs, defeated and small. She left without another word, the door clicking shut softly behind her. I felt no triumph, only a faint, clean sadness for the path she had chosen, and a profound gratitude for the path I had fought for. That evening I drove home. Our house was no longer the small one we'd started with. It was a comfortable, sprawling home on the outskirts of the city, with a large garden where Alex grew vegetables and the children had worn a path to the old oak tree. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw them. Alex was teaching our son, David, how to fix a bicycle chain, his large, capable hands guiding our son's smaller ones. Our daughter, Maya, was sitting on the porch steps, engrossed in a book, her brow furrowed in concentration just like her father's. The scene was so normal, so deeply perfect, it stole my breath. Alex looked up as I approached, his face breaking into the quiet, crinkly-eyed smile that was reserved just for me. He didn't ask about my day. He just stood and wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. "Long day?" he murmured into my hair. "I've had longer," I said, sinking into his embrace. Later, after the children were in bed, we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The silence was comfortable, filled with the contented hum of a shared life. "I saw Clara Vance today," I said quietly. He didn't tense. He just took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. And I closed the last door. I said. And I knew it was true. The final tenacious thread to the Fiancé had been severed, not with drama but with a quiet, firm dismissal. I looked out at the horizon, where the last vestiges of sunset were fading into a star-dusted night. The past was not just behind me, it was a closed book on a distant shelf. The future was this peace, this love, this hard-won ordinary miracle of a life I had built with my own 2 hands and a steadfast heart. The girl from the rice paddy was gone. The victim in the fire was gone. The ghost was finally, truly at rest. I was Lily Miller. And my story was just beginning. The end.